So, we all love Marvel films, but do you know how financially successful each of these films were? Did you know, for example, that Ant-Man was way more successful than Iron Man 2?
Right, so we've probably seen, for example, that Avengers has broken all sorts of box office records and is currently sitting at the kind of number 5 in the all-time charts. But we've actually dug a little bit deeper, and what we've done is we've gone through all of the Marvel films and actually looked at them compared to the budget. And you may find some of these results a little bit surprising. Certain films who you thought may have been successful may not have been. There's actually films that may have been more successful than you first think. So you can see easily, for example, what the kind of the grosses of each films are. But what we've done, we've worked out a way of comparing them against the actual production budget and to work out which has actually been the most profitable. Now we're going to do 2 videos, so there's obviously a lot of Marvel films altogether. So this first video is going to focus on the kind of the licensed out Marvel properties for studios like Fox, Sony, things like that. So it won't have the actual Marvel studio films themselves. We'll basically do a separate video in regards to that. And I'm going to tell you basically how it kind of works out. So first of all, you have to understand what we're talking about. So when a film goes into production, basically it has a production budget. And that budget, it basically is the cost of producing the actual film itself. And that's what you'll see sometimes on things like IMDb. That will be the production budget. But what isn't included is things like marketing and also the kind of the cut that the cinemas take of the profits, basically. So, for example, if you have a production budget, you have to essentially double it. So if a budget has got 200 million on a production budget, you essentially have to say the total budget is, say, 400 million. So that's what we'll call it. We'll call that the total budget. So it has to make over, in this example, over $400 million to become successful, even though the production budget was only 200 million. So what we've done is we've worked out a point system to basically kind of make it kind of even against the whole kind of like all these budgets and all these films and stuff. So the way, just to let you know the maths before we kind of get into it, this is the geeky bit, I guess. It's basically the total gross divided by the total budget, and that gives you a kind of a points ratio. So to give you an idea, 2.0 means basically the film has made twice its total budget. So if, like, for example, if the production budget was 200 million, the total budget was 400 million, and it's made 800 million worldwide, then that's a 2.0. That means it's made double than its total budget. So using that kind of example as well, if it's a 1.0, it's basically broke even, and 0.5 basically means it's made half of it. So we've gone through all of the Marvel films and basically used that formula. I'll kind of go through it a little bit more in detail as we kind of go into each film, and we'll talk about it. And it's interesting because you can really see some trends and why maybe the studios have made certain decisions. Right, so we're going to start off with the original kind of Marvel movie that was on cinema. I'll point out these are only going to be films that are on cinema, so we're not going to be talking about ones that were released straight to video, for example, like the 89 version of The Punisher, although that was released on some cinemas in Europe, but this is worldwide grosses. So these figures, as well, I have to give a shout out to Box Office Mojo. This is where they got the majority of these figures from. So we'll start off with Howard the Duck, which was the first Marvel film to be released in cinemas. Now that one had a 35 million production budget, so the total budget was 70 million. The total gross of that movie was just under 38 million, so it obviously made a loss. In fact, it made a loss of over $32 million. So the score for that one, if you like, is 0.54. That's your first one for example. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's basically it's made 0.54, which means it's just over half of what the movie cost. So basically, it's made a huge, a massive loss, nearly half of what it was in the total budget. So we move on to The Punisher. The Punisher 2004. Now we're not talking about the 89 Punishers, that wasn't released in all the cinemas. So that had a production budget of 33 million, a total budget of 66 million, and the gross of that movie was 54,700,000. So that's 0.82. So that also made a loss.
Thanks a lot, John Travolta.
Surprisingly, they made a sequel, Punisher Warzone. Now the total, I'm just going to talk about the total budgets now, as I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. So the total budget for that one was 70 million, and basically this made a huge loss. This one it made just over 10 million worldwide, so it was nearly 60 million loss, and this is by far and away the lowest profit. So if you're wondering why The Punisher isn't going to come back to the big screen, this is why. It made nearly a 60 million loss with a 0.14 score. Basically, it is the lowest profit. You know, it's the Marvel movie that made the biggest loss. Basically,
yeah.
Do you want to go through Daredevil?
Right. So let's talk about Daredevil. So it was a film that I was particularly excited about. It was a movie which, for me, should have been it's great, and I kind of enjoyed it at the time. But you know, it really is. You know, should have done a lot better. But so you know.
So it's a 156 million total budget. It made 179 million worldwide, which it did give it a profit of 23 million, which gives it a 1.14. So it was profitable, not hugely profitable, but it was profitable. And of course, with that they made Elektra.
Yeah. So Elektra was basically a movie which should have been straight to DVD at best. I mean, you know, hot girls don't make a good movie. Had some quite good special effects, but clearly they were hoping to flip something off the back of that movie, and it made a massive loss. In fact, it was well, you can go through the numbers.
So Elektra, they actually cut the budget significantly to Daredevil. So the total budget for Daredevil, for example, was 156 million. The total budget for Elektra was 86 million, but it only made 56 million worldwide, which was a 29 million loss, which gives it a 0.65. So, you know, not money well spent on that one, unfortunately. But now we're going to talk about, I would say, probably this is the first breakout hit of Marvel, and that's the Blade trilogy.
And actually one of my favourite films. Well, the first two movies, probably two of my favourite Marvel films up until the Avengers, probably, or maybe Iron Man. So I think you keep talking about numbers.
All right, fair
I
enough.
Can't be bothered with them. I do numbers for a day job.
Fair enough. So Blade, basically, its production budget was 45 million. Total budget, including marketing and cinema cuts, 90 million. It made 131 million, so that was a decent profit. And this movie kind of came out of nowhere. And in fact, this movie, when it was first released, it wasn't even marketed as a Marvel movie. It didn't have the Marvel logo on it. But after it kind of become a success, that's when they pretty much started to brand it with the Marvel.
And let's not forget, this was an 18 at the time in the UK. So, you know, normally films are set in that kind of, I think, was it PG-12 they call it in America? So that kind of, you know, young teen, you know, older adolescent space, because that's where they know they're going to make the most amount of profit. And this film flipped, you know, a good bit of money.
So this it actually made 41 million, or just over 41 million dollars, which is a decent amount. The score of it is 1.45, so it made, you know, its budget and a half, again back near enough.
And the last decent thing Wesley Snipes did.
Well, we actually had Blade 2, and they slightly upped the budget. The production budget went from 45 million in the first Blade to 54 million in the second Blade, giving you the total budget of 108 million. And that one made 155 million worldwide, which was a 47 million profit, and that gives that score of 1.43. And then we go on to Blade Trinity, and once again they up the budget again. Its initial production budget was 65 million, total budget of 130. It made the worldwide gross of 128 million, and actually made a loss. It was about only about $1 million loss in total. So these figures are approximations, but you could pretty much say that. It near enough just broke even, but obviously the kind of franchise grinded to a halt with that one. That is why you then didn't see another Blade movie, basically, because the first two Blade movies made a decent amount of profit. The third one, obviously, Wesley Snipes' his contract is going up, and you know he's costing more. The budget of the film's going up, but the profits stopped. and that is why you then didn't see a Blade 4.
And this is also something, you know, Ryan Reynolds' first visit into Marvel. Then he jumped to DC, both fate flops, and now we've got Deadpool. Fingers crossed, third time lucky.
Well, I wouldn't call Blade Trinity a flop. I mean, it did make a small loss, but
it probably pulled it back in merchandise and DVD sales.
Its score was
etc.,
0.99, so it's just under. So when we move on to Ghost Rider, and a Ghost Rider, actually, when you think about it, is a relatively, not a mainstream character, had a surprisingly high budget. Its production budget was 110 million. So its total budget 220 million, and it made 228 million, which gave it basically just under 9 million budget. So it's a 1.03. So it was just about profitable. And then of course they made the second film, the Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance. The budget on this one was significantly reduced, nearly half. The production budget was 64 million, so the total budget around 128 million. It made 132 million, which was pretty much half of what the original Ghost Rider made, or near enough, which gives it basically a 1.03 again. So both the Ghost Rider movies were just over breaking even. They were, they weren't anything to write home about, basically. But the studio didn't lose money on them, but they really weren't profitable. So again, this is why we haven't seen further. This is why the studios kind of didn't bother making any more Ghost Riders.
Nicolas Cage is an interesting character. He kind of never really. He always plays Elvis Presley. He wants a Ghost Rider Elvis Presley, so
but that's the thing, when you're in a franchise and it's going on, your price goes up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously, with rising costs and everything, but if it's not making money, they simply can't afford it. Now we're going to move on to Fantastic Four. Now this is one of these films that people view as a flop, but it isn't. The original Fantastic Four movies weren't a flop. So the first one, the 2004 one, so we're talking about the 2004 one, not the more recent 2015. The production budget on that one was 100 million. Total budget, obviously, then in that case, 200 million. So it made 330 million. So that's obviously 130 million profit. A pretty decent profit on that one. So that was a 1.65 score. So fairly good.
Yeah.
Surprising?
Well, do you know what? It was at that point in which you could see that the Marvel superhero films were ramping up. The marketing was kind of crazy around those films. I mean, they were still pretty naff in my personal opinion, but it had a pretty good cast as well.
But you can see why they made the sequel.
Yeah.
And you look back at the Fantastic Four films, you think, they weren't so good, but it made a decent amount of money. And of course, then they made Rise of the Silver Surfer. They upped the budget on this one. They could have obviously had more special effects of the Silver Surfer and stuff like that.
And I think we should also remember, with those films were licensed out films, weren't they?
Yeah.
We're not talking about Marvel.
No, we're talking about licensed Marvel films. Yeah. So the production budget for Rise of the Silver Surfer was 130 million, which is a 260 million approximate total budget. And this movie made 289 million worldwide, which gave it just under a 30 million in profit. So it's still profitable, but it was nowhere near as profitable as the first film, and that's why I didn't get number 3 in that sort of like that cast. And I'd just like to say, right, the films that have made a loss in all that time, because Marvel did license these movies, Marvel didn't make any loss whatsoever. They made loads of money. They were rolling in it by this point. So just going back to the Rise of the Silver Surfer for a second. So its profit score on that one was 1.11. So if you're the studio, this is where I find it interesting, because you're thinking, okay, so Fantastic Four did make, even the first one made a decent profit. The second one made a modest profit. So they're thinking, but obviously it's diminishing in returns. So what they're going to do? So you can see the mindset of why they've kind of now rebooted it and kind of think, okay, let's try it again. So let's try it again.
And do a worse job.
Well, obviously they didn't think at the time. So we'll talk about the current Fantastic Four movie. Now we're filming this in November of 2015. There may be some cinemas worldwide that still have this, in certain countries. So this figure may be slightly different when it's all said and done. This is true of this and Ant-Man. I think they're both still playing in very a small amount, but so the Fantastic Four 2015 had a $120 million budget. which was the same as, or just under actually, the Rise of the Silver Surfer. So the total budget for that one was 240 million, and to date, which I think is going to be near enough what it's going to end at, was 167 million worldwide, which is 72 million loss. So that gives the score of 0.69. So yes, it is a flop. It's not the worst flop of a Marvel movie, but it is obviously a loss. I think he probably would settle on 0.7 when it's all sort of said and done, basically.
I mean, you know, like I say, we're talking about flops here, but don't forget this doesn't take into inclusion of DVD, Blu-ray, and streamed movies.
This is purely cinema sales.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to move on to the Hulk now. We're talking about the Ang Lee Hulk on this one. Now, I am actually, even though the Incredible Hulk, I'll point out, is actually a Marvel film, I'm going to go through the Incredible Hulk's figures because it's the only film that there's been more than one film made where it's been made by different.
It's a complete reboot. Both films are.
It's been made by different studios.
Yeah.
So even though the Incredible Hulk is a Marvel film, I will talk about it in comparison to the Ang Lee Hulk. So the Ang Lee Hulk basically was a 137 million production budget, 274 million total budget, and it grossed 245 million. So it's a 28 million loss, 0.89. All right. So it's surprising in a way that Marvel then decided to go for the Hulk, because it made a loss, and the Hulk film is clearly going to be an effects-driven film. So we're going to talk about the Incredible Hulk, which is is that to all the Marvel films? Is the only kind of pure Marvel film we're going to talk. Although Universal, I think, have still the distribution rights to it, so it's a little bit of a muddy one, the Hulk. So the Incredible Hulk, the Marvel version, had a $150 million budget, which was higher than the original Hulk. So the total cost of that was $300 million. It made $245 million. So it actually made a loss. I don't think people realise this, because this is the same year as Iron Man came out. Marvel's Incredible Hulk made a loss. Now there's a lot of talk of, we want Hulk to be this kind of supporting character. We think he works better as that, and blah blah blah. And Universal have got distribution rights. Bullshit. It's because they made a loss, and they don't want to have him in a film where it's potentially not going to make a lot of money. So the Incredible Hulk score was 0.81. I mean, it wasn't. It's a substantial loss. So, you look at this, the psychology of the studio, and that is, I think, the real reason why we are not seeing a
proper Hulk film. Yeah. So, and on top of that, that went through production hell. You had what's his name was
Edward Norton. Yeah, it was
Edward Norton being a bit of a pain. But the thing which also should have kind of secured this success was kind of after Iron Man the next film which was introducing the Avengers as well. So they even had the Edward Norton Tony Stark meet at the end. Is it Edward Norton's Tony Stark? I forget now.
It's General Ross, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
So this is actually, if you look at the Marvel films proper, and we'll talk about it again in the second video, but this is the only Marvel film that has made a loss compared to its budget. All right. So we're going to move on to the X-Men franchise.
Marvel Studios.
Marvel Studios film that's made a loss. So we're going to move on to the X-Men franchise, which is an interesting read to be sure. Okay, so the original X-Men had quite a low budget, actually. It was a fairly low budget movie. 75 million production budget, which means it's 150 million all in, including marketing costs and cinema and all that sort of stuff. So it actually made just shy of 300 million, 296 million, which gives it 146 million profit, which is a 1.97. So it made nearly double its total budget. That is a fantastic profit. And they weren't expecting the X-Men to be a huge film. And this is why Fox keep pumping out X-Men to us. We're going to go through the entire X-Men films in a minute. But you can see that was a huge hit for them.
And let's face it, Wolverine, massive character.
Well, at the time, Hugh Jackman was a relative unknown. You've got to bear in mind. Yeah. All right. So we'll move on to X-Men 2. Now, with X-Men 2, they upped the budget to 110 million for their production budget from 75 from the original film. The total budget on that one was 210 million, giving a and that one gave us a 407 million total gross, which was 187 million profit, a 1.85 score.
And my favourite X-Men film.
Probably most people's favourite X-Men film, I would wager. But again, a decent profit. It wasn't quite as profitable as the... here's where the figures kind of, you have to realise. That film wasn't quite as profitable as the original X-Men, even though the gross was higher against the production, against the budget, it was slightly less profitable, you see? So the X-Men Last Stand, they upped the budget significantly, right? So
and my worst X-Men, well, Marvel film ever, actually, I would say.
So I'll just repeat the X-Men 2 budget. So the X-Men 1, 75 million production budget. X-Men 2, 110 million. X-Men The Last Stand, 210 million production budget. Gives it a 420 million total budget. This movie did 459 million. We're giving a 39 million
profit.
Profit. Now this is where things get interesting, because at the time, that is clearly, right up until Days of Future Past, that is the highest grossing X-Men film, right? So when you look back and think, and you hear people say, oh yeah, X-Men The Last Stand, before, you know, the Days of Future Past came out, was the highest grossing X-Men film, which is true, but it was not, it was the least profitable.
That's why they always give you grace figures.
Yeah. So the profit on that one was 1.09. So it still made a profit, but at that point, okay, so what changed then? They started mixing it up, didn't they? We had things like the X-Men, the Wolverine solo film, and then eventually when we got to the X-Men films, it was First Class. So they thought it's still profitable, but the way that they're going, they had to change it up. So we'll talk about X-Men's Origins Wolverine, which they reduced the budget. The production budget was 150 million, 300 million total budget, and that made 373 million profit. Total gross, which gave it a 73 million profit and 1.24 score. So better than it performed better than, for example, it made more.
Last Stand,
yeah, a better ratio than Last Stand, although its grosses weren't quite as high. And then X-Men First Class, $160 million budget, so they're kind of keeping the budget again lower. 320 million total budget, 353 million, giving it a $33 million budget, only a 1.1 score. So X-Men First Class wasn't all that successful,
but it was there to fix, I think, the issues that they had with Last Stand, and which it did.
X-Men Wolverine, because the last two X-Men films were not critically they were not critically well received, and if a film does kind of poorly, the next film in the franchise, even though it could be very good, just sometimes suffers because of that. This is the fear with Star Wars, because the prequels were, even though I think it's unfounded.
And we know who was in, obviously, X-Men Origins Wolverine. I said he was only in 3 films, but...
Hugh Jackman?
Deadpool.
Oh, yes.
He's cursed.
So we'll move on to X-Men Days of Future Past. This had a $200 million production budget, 400 million total budget, and grossed 747 million, giving it a 347 million in profit, with a score of 1.86. So back to big numbers.
It deserved that money purely for the Quicksilver sequence in the room. That was brilliant.
So that, if you're talking about total grosses, X-Men Days of Future Past has got the highest grosses. It's grossing 747 million, but the actual original X-Men is still the most profitable at 1.97 score.
Good.
So Wolverine, moving on, which is the kind of the last X-Men related film we'll talk about. 120 million budget, production budget of 240 million. The total grosses that one was 414 million, so 174 million profit, 1.72, pretty decent returns on that one. So now we're going to move on to Spider-Man, which is basically Sony's project. So Spider-Man, the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man, had 139 million production budget, so 278 million total budget. and it made 821 million, giving it a $543 million profit, which is a 2.9 score. Fantastic. It made nearly 3 times its total budget.
They marketed that. That had a phenomenal marketing behind it. I mean,
so fantastic. Moving on to Spider-Man 2. 200 million budget. They obviously put some more money back into it and invested it. Higher production costs means it's a total budget of 400 million, and it made 783 million. So again, decent numbers. Not quite as strong as the first film, but obviously they put more money into it. Gave it a $383 million profit with a score of 1.95. Spider-Man 3, $258 million budget. Again, they've increased it. Total budget, a whopping 516 million. This one was the highest grossing Spider-Man film, 890 million, and it made 374 million profit, a 1.72% score.
and was bollocks.
So it's again, but you look at the figures, okay, it's decreasing. So the Spider-Man 3, even though it was the highest grossing, it made the least amount of profit. So again, you look at the psychology and the reasoning of the studio. They obviously want to keep producing Spider-Man films, but they know that they have to change something up because the path that it's going on is becoming a little less profitable for the company. So what they do, they reboot it. And they reboot it with 2012's Amazing Spider-Man, which had a $230 million budget, which is a little bit less than obviously the Spider-Man 3. The total budget for that one, of course, is $460 million. That one made 757 million total grosses, giving it just under 300 million profit with a 1.64 score. And finally, we shall have a look at Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is kind of alluded to be a bit of a failure, but it really wasn't too much of a failure. So let's look at the figures. It had a 200 million production budget. The total budget, including marketing and cinema cuts, was 400 million, and it made over 700 million worldwide gross. The profit of that one was just over 300 million, which gives it a profit ratio of 1.77. So it's a slowly diminishing return, and this obviously gives credence to the reason why that Sony were looking to try and kind of solidify the Spider-Man brand, and hence why they've obviously kind of partnered up with Marvel in the kind of the future plans for it. Anyway, that concludes part 1 of our financial analysis video. Hopefully you found this interesting. Come back for part 2, because then we're going to be having a look at the actual Marvel Studios movies and see how they compare to the kind of the licensed out properties that we've had a look in this video. And if you like this kind of video, let us know, and obviously we can look at other future properties such as DC, Star Wars, things like that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and bye for now.